about myself, we had three out of the four grandparents live with us at different times. Two of those had Alzheimer's, one had cancer, one had heart disease. So let's just hope none of that's genetic, right? But with that being said, I was able to see what it was like for my grandparents to go through that disease, for their spouse to help take care of them, for my parents to be in the sandwich generation, and then just me sitting back and watching as a kid. So that's me a little bit as I'm going through this. So let's go through some disclaimers first. If I talk too fast, let me know. I tend to get super excited. I also cannot stand still, so I'm sorry if I walk in front. I am not negative about the aging process, but like I said, I'm a social worker. No one calls me because the roses smell good, okay? They only call me because there's a problem. So all of my examples will be negative, but that does not mean I'm negative about the aging process. Everything I say is meant to be stereotypically and generically. We're not going individualistic on all of this stuff. If you have questions, please say them as they come about. I love roundtable discussions. So if you're like me, you'll forget it if you don't say it. So bring on those questions. And I am not here to offend anyone. I will bring up some political and stuff like that. So none of it's meant to be politically inoffensive. So if you have any questions with that one afterwards, please come see me. So with that being said, let's learn a little bit more about depression, grief, and anxiety. So I'm going to come from the standpoint of a geriatric mental health therapist, okay? But all of this can be used at any phase in our life. So the trouble is, old age is not interesting until one gets there. It's a foreign country with an unknown language to the young and even the middle-aged. Yeah, there we go, right? So let's take off the table of being know-it-alls, right? We have been teenagers. We have been 20-year-olds. Some of us have been 40-year-olds, 50, 60, right? None of us have ever been old. We have no idea what it is like until we get there. And so we really must respect the opportunity of learning from those that have been there. And as one of my clients told me once, it will be your turn soon, okay? The days are long, but the years are short. And so this is why I love working with our older folks. So why are we going through depression, grief, and anxiety? Couple reasons. So when someone has cancer, what's the first thing we do? Oh my gosh, how can I take care of you, right? What can I do for you? What happens when someone has depression? Let's go. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Let's get moving. What happens when someone's grieving? Are you over it yet? Let's go. It's been a year. What happens when someone's anxious? Knock it off, right? Yeah. But we have to be able to treat these same symptoms that we would if someone had cancer or another medical ailment. So I really want us to have some empathy when it comes to these. Empathy means I'm going to walk beside you in your journey. Sympathy means I'm going to cry with you. So we want to have some empathy. We want to walk along with their journey, just the same we would with any other medical ailment. Another reason why we're going to go through these is everyone confuses them for each other. And I think if we better identify our emotions, why we're feeling what we're feeling, then we can better respond and act to them. And then when it comes to any sort of mental health, we feel guilt-laden. We feel like it's our fault, we've done something wrong, and there's stigma with it. So we want to get rid of that. So let's start with depression. Depression typically has a precipitating event. So when we talk about mental health, we don't talk about it as A equals B equals C, and that's how we got to D. Mental health is more of a circular type of thinking. So here is Mindy, and then we've got all of these different factors that are going to add up and cause some problems. So then we sprinkle in a little bit of this really hot weather, right? We sprinkle in some inflation, we sprinkle in my job, we sprinkle in my kids, and then we bake it up and we have this really fun cake that tastes terrible. My job as a mental health therapist will figure out what ingredients made that cake. But we have to understand there's a reason why that cake was made. So there's going to typically be a precipitating event, and it's not usually a clear event. According to our diagnostic manual, I highly suggest no one read it because you will have every symptom in there, okay? But according to our diagnostic manual, depression is the persistent feeling of sadness, hopelessness, and loss of interest in activities that were previously enjoyed. So every time you guys go to the doctor, we do the PHQ-9 now, right? In the last 2 weeks, have you been feeling nervous, anxious? Nope, that's the wrong one. In the last 2 weeks, have you been feeling down, sad, hopeless? That's the testing, and this is why we're doing it. But we don't want to confuse it for normal sadness. So here is your baseline, okay? We are all happy and sad all day long, right? Our alarm clock went off. We made it to church. Church is over. We're having lunch. Mindy's talking. She's almost done, right? We do this multiple times a day. Depression is you go down and you stay, okay? So that's going to be the difference. Everyone is allowed to do this. And if you are allowed to have a bad day, so are your children, so are your loved ones, so are your clients. Everyone is allowed to have a bad day, and we need to afford them the opportunity to do this all day long. But depression becomes a problem when you're down and you're not coming back up. So, some of our typical depressive symptoms is, do you have a depressed mood most of the day or nearly every day? That can also be down or hopeless, doesn't necessarily have to be depressed. A decrease of pleasure of interest or activities. Any major weight loss or weight gain in the last 2 weeks. Slowing down of thoughts or physical movements. Fatigue or loss of energy. Feelings of worthlessness, excessiveness, or inappropriate guilt. Lack of concentration, meaning are you having a hard time watching TV, reading the newspaper, your brain just cannot stay focused. Recurrent thoughts of death or suicide. Now, when it comes to our geriatrics, we have to separate the difference between suicide and wanting to die, okay? Because we want people to be thinking and getting peaceful and ready for death. And as we age and as our ailments come along and we're starting to outlive our friends, death is on the forefront of our brain, and that is okay. That is normal. I think about death probably way more than most people my age because I work with it, right? That doesn't mean I want to kill myself. So we have to separate the difference between wanting to kill ourselves versus being ready to die. So we want to separate that. So I have a picture of a person drowning. You kind of pretend that's a picture of a person drowning, okay? The reason why I have that is because the best way for me to describe depression to you is that you're drowning. You can see the light, but you cannot get your body to swim in that direction. You're completely overwhelmed. You cannot put one foot in front of the other. Your brain is constricted, okay? Is that the same as normal sadness? No. Everyone has the right to feel sad, right? If my dog dies, I have the right to feel sad about that. That does not mean I'm depressed. A lot of us, have a lack of concentration. That doesn't mean I'm depressed. There are days I eat more. That doesn't mean I'm depressed. But if this happens for long periods of time and you can't get yourself out of it and you recognize you need to swim up but you can't, that is that constriction. That is that depression. This is when it becomes a problem that we need to work on it. So, now, as I said, mental health is very gray, right? Let's make it more gray. These symptoms are your typical symptoms found in females, okay? But this is what we do off the PHQ-9. You have to have 5 or more of these symptoms in the last 2 weeks. So if you're going to go to your doctor and get a depressive medication, you will get a diagnosis of major depressive disorder because the way our diagnostic manual is written up is everyone is major depressive disorder and you only have to have it for 2 weeks. Now, with that, we scale it. Major depressive disorder, mild, reoccurrent, moderate, severe, psychotic. So there's multiple different levels, but that does not mean we've done anything wrong. That's just the way we currently label that. So these are your typical symptoms. But then we get into males. Males, when they're feeling depressed, typically will show more anger or irritability, very rigid with their emotions. Now, our older folks, men don't cry, right? Men don't wear pink. We don't talk about the war. Very rigid. We have to respect that generational boundaries. But if they are escaping by working more, having more extra hobbies, not wanting to talk about it, be more rigid with their emotions, tend to be more angry or irritable, those could be signs of depression. But then, it doesn't look like that in seniors. Nope, not at all. So, seniors tend to show psychosomatic symptoms. This is what we say, we have a physical ailment that is not actually there. So this is where they'll say they have a problem with their bowels. Financially, we're running out of problems. Maybe I have cancer. I used to be a social worker at the med center, and I had the stroke ICU unit. I had a brain aneurysm like every day. Like every time I had a headache, I was like, right? You know? That's psychosomatic symptoms. So even though their physician, their financial person, everyone has reassured them that they're fine, and they're still fixated on a situation, that is signs of depression within our older folks. And it is perfectly okay to say, I wish God would just take me. Because again, that is where we need to establish the difference between, are they wanting to kill themselves, which, I don't have a slide for this, I don't want to get into this. Suicide amongst our elders, 84 and plus, is the highest amongst all population. 21 out of 100,000 versus our general population is 12 out of 100,000, okay? So we definitely want to pay attention to those, but we also want to open up the conversation of allowing peace and opportunity and being ready to die when they're ready to die. Who's depressed now, right? I know. You're welcome. You have a cookie, so. Eat more chocolate. Have some coffee. So why are we going to put this in with loss and grief? Well, everyone says they kind of look the same. But here, on your baseline, we said everyone does this, right? Depression's this. Grief is this. Okay? I looked at your picture and I smiled. I looked at your picture and I cried. We're all over the place. Now, grief is going to be defined in many different ways here. But today, how many of you guys like to lose control in your life? No? Weird. Neither do our seniors. Yeah. How many people like predictability and structure? Especially our children, right? But if you look at your life, you've experienced change throughout your life multiple times. And usually it's wanted change. You graduate high school, you go to college, you get married, you have babies. Babies were the biggest loss of my life, and I'll explain that one later. But they're loved, they're fine. But we usually go through wanted changes. And even if we lose our job, we still have control in our lives and capability to get that change back, to have control in our lives back. But as we age, we start going through changes that are unwanted and we can't get back. So one of the ways to look at it is at 3 years old, you're super excited to pee by yourself. At 16, you're super excited to drive by yourself. At 35, you're making some money. 65, you hope you're making money. 75, you hope you're still driving. And 90, you hope we're still peeing by ourselves, right? Okay? Yeah. So this is where we start getting unwanted changes that we cannot control. So we want to start looking at unwanted changes such as social. Our older folks have lived in their houses for 40 plus years. My generation is going to move 11 plus times. It is a major deal to have to leave your home, right? Because you're also leaving the church. How big of a deal is it to not be able to come back to the church services? What about the muscle memory of our neighborhood? The muscle memory of our house? Most accidents happen within 10 miles of your house because you're running off of muscle memory. You're not paying attention. This is what happens in our home. We don't act confused in our home because we have muscle memory. We know what's going on. But, you know, if you rearrange the furniture or you take someone out of their comfort zone, that muscle memory is gone. So our sense of familiar, that social loss is huge. And I experience a lot of this when people have to move to a senior living community and they did not want to choose that because us younger folks are like, what's the big deal? You got someone cooking and cleaning for you, right? But I am looking forward to that part, for sure. According to my children, the school lunches are better than my cooking, so they're probably looking forward to that too. But in reality, that's a choice they didn't want to make, and they're losing their social livelihood. Now, look at our physical health. How many people are super excited to walk with a walker? Nope. Neither are they, right? We have to notice the loss of our physical independence as a huge thing. Driving is our last form of independence that we lose. And that is a huge thing because dependency is a really bad word, right? No one wants to be dependent. And we have to recognize these as losses. These are griefs. And I think if we recognize them as losses versus depression, that gives you more control back. So, how about employment? Did you guys know retirement is a huge killer in the United States? Anyone want to know why? Probably that's why you're here, right? Say what?
Loss of purpose.
Exactly. I am Mindy, the social worker, right? I'm not just Mindy. Our identity and our purpose and our need in society as Americans is based upon our job. Our identity is based upon our job. You take away our job, who are we? No one needs me anymore. And then as Americans, we have this really fun thing of competing on who's going to be more stressed out, who's the busiest, and who works harder. It's like if you work 40 hours a week, you're like, well, I work 60. I mean, step up your game, right?
Yep.
And so then COVID hit, and none of us knew what to do with ourselves. None of us had hobbies. None of us had any coping skills because we worked all at the time. And the same thing happens is when we retire, we don't have no idea what to do with ourselves. And we fall into that depression, not recognizing that it's a loss. And we can figure out a new purpose for ourselves. We don't have to be constricted. But that retirement, that loss of an identity and purpose, self-esteem, being needed is huge. And last but not least, that financial, fixed income, money runs out. Okay? It is super expensive to age or buy groceries. So that is a huge fear. Again, another loss. So we've seen the difference between that constriction versus the losses and how this might have a little bit more control, or we might feel less guilty if we're recognizing this as a loss versus a depression. Yeah. So let's get into death just a little bit, because death is a loss. And we typically say we're only grieving if we've lost someone, right? We can grieve over these losses. Aren't these real losses? Absolutely, 100%. So we can grieve over that. But we cannot compare ourselves with other people, because our grief is going to be based upon the relationship and the strength of a relationship that we had with this. Not with, or the person that died, or our animal that died, whatever it was. So you cannot compare yourself to anyone else, because I may have really loved my dog, but maybe my husband didn't. So I'm grieving, he's excited, you know? This is why you cannot compare yourself to other people. It's based upon your relationship and your reaction with that thing that you lost. The other thing we want to think about when it actually comes to the death of a loved one, not only the strength of the relationship that you had with that person, but there's two different types of death. We have the instantaneous, like car accident death. Then we have the long ailment death, okay? When we have the instantaneous death, that hits us super hard and super fast. When we have the long ailment, such as dementia or cancer or something that we process for a while, you have to recognize that you're grieving while that person is still alive, okay? You're grieving together. You have time to process the death and what is actually happening. So if you feel relieved when it is over, do not feel guilty at all. If you're not very tearful, do not feel guilty. Recognize the fact that you have already grieved that death, probably with them along their journey. Or you could actually be grieving twice, you know, again afterwards, because the journey's over. So, it's messy, like I said. Mental health is very gray, right? Lots of different levels of loss, but this we want isn't quite as guilt-laden as the depression. How are we doing so far? No one is sleeping on me, so I'm going to take that as a good sign. But any questions so far? Okay, so let's get back onto these losses as we age. I had a client tell me the only thing golden about aging was his teeth and his pee. So, we've decided to call it the rusty years, right? As we age, we really think we are going to be super excited to be retired, to sleep in, get bored, and take lots of trips, right? But then as we age, reality sets in, and we get failing health, that bad word of dependency, and low finances. And so, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super happy, when I hit this region right here, realistically, where should I be at? Right? So I'm not trying to minimize what you're going through. I'm not trying to say you can never be happy again. But let's be realistic about our emotions and where we're actually at, and give yourself a little bit of grace and credit, because I bet you, if your best friend came up to you and was like, I'm so upset about X, Y, and Z, you'd probably be like, oh my gosh, yes, let's talk about that, right? But then if you tell yourself you're upset about X, Y, and Z, you're your own worst critic, you talk super mean to yourself, and you don't allow yourself the opportunity to experience the emotions that you realistically should have. So, as we age, we are a socially undesirable class. Yes, I know, I'm making you all depressed. So, it is very unpleasant to be called old, right? Would you guys rather be called elder or elderly? Yes!
Over the hill.
Corrected people when they use the word elderly. I am not elderly. I am older, but I'm not elderly.
Yeah.
Yet.
No, because elder is a sign of respect, right? Yeah. We should be honoring the walking, living history that you have done that I can only read in a book, right? I should be learning from all your mistakes so I don't stub my toe. And I will honestly say, I feel you guys have made me a much better parent, because I have taken the time to spend with my children, knowing that the days are long but the years are short. I have worked less so I can be with my kids. Like, I have soaked all of that up thanks to you guys. But I also see you as elders, because elderly is a sign of dependency, which we are learning is a bad word, right? Do you guys want to live in a senior living facility or a senior living community? What words are we using when we're talking to other people? Okay? Freud has taught us parental love, but we forgot about grandparent love. And one of my clients said, give them the roses while they can still smell it. Meaning, call, text, give compliments, whatever you can while they can still enjoy it, because at their funeral they can't, right? And then, who wouldn't be depressed living with adults who wear diapers or discuss cremation at the dinner table? So think about this. If you go and you are visiting with your friends, and that's what we're discussing, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super happy, how happy are you going to be? Right? Like, realistically, these conversations are hard, and this is what we're dealing with, and we don't want to avoid them, but does that make us depressed? Or is that a loss that we're experiencing? So stay realistic about how you are talking to yourself, what you're saying, the words that you're using, and the respect that you would give your friends is what you need to give to yourself. So now let's throw in boredom. Why not? It wasn't in the title, but let's do it anyways. So, boredom looks like depression and grief. And we learned a lot about this during COVID, because we all lost control and had to stay home, right, and had to be isolated, and we had no idea what to do with ourselves within zero hobby. So we started having vacation brain. We didn't know what day or time it was unless you were homeschooling. We played who was going to cry first. It was not fun. But you had vacation brain. It's hard to stay focused. You're feeling down, sad, depressed, because we're bored. We had no sense of purpose. So really start looking into the fact if you're bored, because if I'm like, I feel you're depressed, and you're like, oh, like, how do I fix that? But if I'm like, I think we're bored, you're like, maybe I should start trying some new things, right? It's more fixable. It's called cognitive reframing, when we start using different words that empower us to be able to make some changes within our lives. And so, the reason why I want to bring this up is because it increases our empathy when it comes to our aging population. Because as they're going on that track of losing their control in their life, I got mine back after COVID. They did not. And they will not. And so this is where we can have better empathy, being like, you know what, I experienced that, and that wasn't very much fun. How can I help? So, now let's get into anxiety. Anxiety seems very different than the rest of these. But when people come into my office, I'm like, well, do you think you're more nervous or you're more just sad right now? And they're like, well, isn't that the same thing? I'm like, well, no, not really. Because we treat them differently. So again, we normally have a precipitating event, and according to our diagnostic manual, you need to have an excessive worry, anxiety, nervousness, everyone uses different words, for 6 months. Why is that 6 months and depression's 2 weeks? I don't know, didn't write the book. But this one you have to have for about 6 months. Our common testing that we do is the GAD-7 when it comes to this, but typically you're only going to see like the PHQ-9 with depression in the doctor's office. And again, we don't want to confuse it with normal anxiety. So again, here's your baseline. Okay, we do this every day. Down and depressed, grief, anxiety. There you go. We're up and we're saying. Our mind is racing. We cannot stay focused. Luckily, these look the same in about men and women in our geriatrics. So, do you have excessive worry, control, or nervousness? Do you worry about a bunch of different things? Is it hard for you to stop or control your worrying? Do you feel restless, keyed up, or on edge? Do you have a hard time standing still? I'm not nervous right now. I just really don't sit still. Do you become easily fatigued? Hard difficulty in concentrating, right? Same as depression, same as boredom. Increase of irritability, muscle tension. Do you sleep more or sleep less? See how some of those are really relatable to depression? Really hard to distinguish the difference. So, as depressive was that drowning, overwhelming feeling, anxiety is a hamster. Here's my problem. It jumps on the wheel and it just starts spinning. Spinning, 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 spinning. And that's when you're going to get your racing thoughts. That's when you're going to get your flight of ideas. So racing thoughts is where you're worrying and you can't stop, and it kind of just keeps going down the rabbit hole, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Okay? Flight of ideas is I'm over here, then I'm over here, then I'm over here. I always tell my husband, I'm like, I have so many window browsers open, and he's got to keep up. Okay? Figure out which one I'm on at this time. So that is going to be our hamster on the wheel, running and racing. Now, it's my job to figure out why you have a hamster. It's your job to get that hamster off the wheel. Okay? So once we recognize that we have a hamster and it's running around, it's our job to get it off the wheel. Now, we have two different types of brains. Didn't know if you knew this, but we do. We have a rational brain. This one functions off of logic, facts, reasoning. I know I have zero reason to be anxious right now. I'm safe in my home. But my emotional brain says, panic, fire, whatever it may be. But feelings are not facts at all. And so one of the best ways for you to get that hamster off the wheel is to recognize that your feeling brain is talking a lot louder than your rational brain right now. And you have to get that rational brain to override what your feelings are, because feelings are not facts, right? So we have two different brains, and we have to recognize which one is running that hamster wheel. Because if you're thinking logically, typically that hamster will stay off the wheel. But let's move on to the next one. Oh, I got rid of that slide. My bad. Okay, let's talk about this other thing. So there are actual reasons to be anxious, though. We have a natural innate ability or fight or flight, right? There's actually 4. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So if a lion came charging in right now, I have a natural reaction to either fight the lion, right? I get the adrenaline surge in my muscles to fight, or I have the natural reaction to run away, where my body will give my muscles the energy they need to run away, or I will freeze and the tiger eats me, or I will do everything I can to fawn and make that tiger happy so it doesn't eat me. Okay? Those are natural responses. And we want to be able to recognize that versus our unnatural anxiety. So rational brain says run away. Okay? Those are natural anxieties that we should have. So if you have a heart attack, should you be anxious? If you can't breathe and you run out of oxygen, should you be anxious? If the tornado sirens go off, should you be anxious? No? Go sit outside and watch. Yeah.
Well, I was out in Grand Island, or not, it was North Platte here about 2 weeks ago, and the tornado siren went off, and I thought it was the gizmo was stuck for the next half hour because it just went on and on and on, and I noticed nobody paid any attention to it. It was like, it's just a sound that's out there.
Yeah.
It was nobody got excited. Nobody.
Although I will say we're like totally like squirrel, right? This last December, was it this last December when we had all those tornadoes?
Yes.
So the sociology in me was sitting back and being like, this is the first time we all actually paid attention and did what we were supposed to do. 'Cause tornadoes don't happen in December, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of fun to watch. Yeah. Yeah. But we should typically be anxious in those situations. So, best way to look at it, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super anxious, I have a heart attack, where should I be? 10, right? That is my natural fight or flight response that gets me to the hospital and gets me help. I get help, I'm doing better, the doctor says I'm okay. Maybe I come back down to a 5. Should I be anxious or hyper aware of having another heart attack again? Yes, because again, that is our natural fight or flight response. So we're never going to go back down to a 0. So realistically speaking, I'm going to say about a 5. So anything from that 5 to 10 is now my emotional brain kicking up and making me panic and think about the anxiety. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 to 5 is normal, typical, realistic after that heart attack. And your guys' numbers are all different, again, based upon how we are. Anything above that, from 5 to 10, is what we call abnormal anxiety, where you need to get that hamster off the wheel. Okay? Now, I don't prescribe medications. We don't do anything with meds. But I will bring this up real quick. Okay? Realistic expectations about meds. A scale of 1 to 10, my anxiety's got me at a 20. Okay? The reasons why you may go and get a medication, because it doesn't get rid of the fact that your dog died, or you have a heart attack, or you had to move. It does not change your scenario. The goal of the medication is to bring that back down to maybe an 8 so you can function. Okay? But a lot of people come back to my office and be like, I'm still depressed. The med's not working. And I'm like, yeah, you still broke your leg. It didn't change the reason why you got on that med. So stay realistic with the numbers and where you're at so we can stay functioning. Again, how would you treat your best friend? Right? Is how we treat ourselves. So, what can we do to help? Biggest thing I want you to walk away from today is they are not giving you a hard time. They are having a hard time. Okay? They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. And it's our job as loved ones to not join on that emotional roller coaster that our loved ones are on. Okay? Because if we jump into the chaos, how does that help? Doesn't help at all, right? So our job is trying to give them back some control in their life, because through every one of those scenarios, the underlying theme was they lost control. They don't have control, and they're striving to get control. Some of us will try to do it appropriately, some of us don't. Some of us lash out. So we need to find ways that will help try to get them control back. And it doesn't mean that we're not saying you can never be happy, okay? Happiness is a choice, and it happens at specific events. Again, when Mindy's done talking, we get to go home, we're all happy, right? But that doesn't mean that if we're not happy 24/7, something's wrong. How do you want to be treated? I think if you internalize a lot of these to yourself, how do you want to be treated? I think you better take care of other people, okay? When it's your turn, what do you want to happen? Validate. Never minimize. We can all see the same car accident and have a different story of what happened. We all have a different level of pain tolerance. We all have different levels of trauma, what we consider a crisis, levels of stress. It is not your job to judge. So validate and not judge. And as we said, give them a purpose. Why? Everyone still has a purpose, right? Smell the roses while they still can. Seek professional help if you need it. Make us the bad guys. We are more than happy to be the bad guys. We want you guys to remain the loved ones. Absolutely. But specifically, generically speaking, when it comes to depression, again, we have that sinking, drowning feeling. We want to give them the opportunity to empower themselves. Help them put one foot in front of the other. We're not going to say go run a marathon. We're going to say, hey, let's try running around the block, and eventually we'll run a marathon, okay? Small, doable steps where they feel accomplished and empowered is a very general way to start helping someone who's feeling depressed. Someone who's grieving is we want to allow the space and permission to grieve over whatever they feel that loss may be, because we just went over a bunch of different ways that you could grieve, right? A bunch of different ways that you could lose. And there's no timeline, okay? People will come to me and they'll be like, it's been a year, I should be over it. And I was like, well, it's not something you get over. Like, it's just, we have to find a way for a new sense of normal and allow you the opportunity. And then I hear all the time, my family doesn't want to hear about it anymore. I'm afraid I'm burdening my friends. I'm bringing them down. Come talk to me. You're not going to bring me down. You're not emotionally attached to me. You will not hurt my feelings. But as a friend or a family member, if that's what they need, give them the opportunity and permission. And anxiety. Figure out why we have a hamster that keeps jumping on the wheel, okay? Best way you can do it is distract to help get that hamster off of the wheel. So, here is an example I'm going to give you guys. I told you my biggest loss, one of my biggest losses in my life was having my children, right? Everyone should say it should be the happiest time of your life. But I was working 3 jobs up until the day I had my children. Again, like, it's this weird thing that we like compete to work all the time. And so I had my daughter, and I thought I had probably what was called postpartum depression, because I'm like, this is terrible. What? Right? I now have this thing stuck to me all the time. Yeah. Dishes aren't getting done. Nothing's getting done. No one told me my hormones would be that crazy. That was not fair, people. Okay? But looking at it, I mourned the loss of my independence. I did not have postpartum depression. I mourned the loss of my independence. And once I was able to recognize that, and once I was able to recognize, like, you're bored. Like, I had nothing to look for. Again, my children are loved. I looked forward to holding them, all that good stuff. But, like, my husband, he went and played video games, and I was so jealous because I'm like, you've got something fun to do, and I got nothing. So, I recognized I needed to get some hobbies, okay? And then I recognized, like, TLC lied to me big time when they were like a baby story. I don't remember what my life was like beforehand. I'm like, I'll tell you what my life was like, right? So, society's image, I thought I was doing wrong because I wasn't meeting society's image. I recognized I had a loss of my independence. And then I recognized I was on a medication that made me extremely anxious. Okay? So did I have postpartum depression? Well, after I looked at it and broke it down, no. Then I had a second kid and realized I already didn't have a life, and that one went a lot easier. So, yeah. So with that being said, it's easier to understand why you're feeling what you're feeling if you take a look at it. So any questions, concerns, comments?
Something you mentioned earlier about the importance of giving a compliment. That was just a small part of that, but it reminded me of, I went to a wedding with my mom, and we were out of state, and we got back to the hotel, and I said, you really look pretty tonight. I like what you're wearing, that kind of thing. And she says, you're the only one that complimented me tonight. That's when I realized how important that is.
Yep. How important is smile, a nod, anything it may be. Yeah. Walk up to a stranger the next time you're at a grocery store and say something nice and just keep on walking. Yep. Does someone have their hand up over here? Yeah.
Was that a picture of two people having
in pillow fight?
It sure was.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute, did I say
Yeah.
that right?
See if I can get you back to that.
I had a hard time coming up with what
Oh.
to
Yep.
tell people.
Yep, they're having a pillow fight. Definitely. And then, this is one of my favorite pictures. This, there is a photographer out there. He lives in New York. I cannot think of his name right offhand. But I love it because, again, living, walking history books of people who paved the way for me to be able to own a business and to be independent as a woman and share my opinion with you whether you like it or not, you know? It's pretty fantastic, and I appreciate everything that you are doing. But we also have to afford our loved ones the opportunity that they gave us as children, okay? They pushed us in the stroller. We need to push them in their wheelchairs. We need to allow them the opportunities to make mistakes. We need to allow them the opportunities to have fun. We need to not try to control them when they did not try to control us as teenagers, right? So we have to afford them those same opportunities. And we can't forget who they are. Not who they were, who they are. Because I'm 43, nope, 42, I like 42, let's not push it, right? But society says I should be celebrating my 13th anniversary of being 29, not 43, right? But I still think I can dance like a 20-year-old. And how many of you at 60 and 70 and 80 still think you're 40? So you still are who you are. None of that has changed. So the death of an old person is like the burning of a library.
Yes, it is.
And we have to make sure that we soak in everything that they can give us. Yeah.
Would you say something about humor and dealing with some of these issues?
Yes.
Because I come from a clan that some folks see us as rather obnoxious and insensitive, but we've used, and I have a long line of relatives that have used humor as a way to raise the dead, if
And
you
cope.
will,
Yeah.
or to equalize the differences.
Yeah. And that is very much based upon your personality and your families, what you grew up with, and your own personal coping skills. So again, you
Yeah.
cannot compare yourself to anyone or anyone else.
No.
I am pretty sarcastic. As a therapist, I am pretty straightforward. I don't sugarcoat. I'm not mean, but I don't sugarcoat a whole lot.
Right.
Because you only get like an hour with me once a week. Let's get to it, right?
That's right.
So,
I'm
some-
with you.
but some people need
Yeah.
the
I-
softer side. And
Yeah.
so make sure that you are aware of what other people may need, you
Yeah,
know,
right.
where I know some places my humor probably is not appropriate,
Yeah.
but there are times where that's exactly what's needed. So read the room, I suppose, is the best way I could. Yeah, but if that's what works for you and your family, do it. Yeah.
I hope it works for
You
you.
had talked about males having the characteristic of high functioning depression. What about in females?
So especially when it comes to retirement, and I'm this stereotypically speaking, our older generation, the women stayed home and worked, and the men worked outside of the home. So their identity was based upon their job, and retirement was a killer. The women, their identity really didn't change because they still had caretaking to do, homemaking to do, and adult children are very needy. I apologize to my parents a lot. I'm sorry, right? So their loss was not as extreme, but there will be times like my personality. Definitely, if I show depressive symptoms, would be overworking and staying overly busy. I would probably also isolate. I like being lonely, okay, or being alone. But saying like I'll stop talking less in that sense. So like I said, these symptoms are going to be just generically speaking, but this is where you can individualize and being like, I suppose the best way to look at it, if someone has something abnormal of their own behavior, okay, then there's a problem. So if this person now all of a sudden wasn't working and now you can't catch them, maybe we should ask why. They could just be having fun, but there could also be something else. So if it's completely abnormal from their normal personality, that would be a red flag. Does that help? Okay.
So along those same lines, I remember having an interesting experience when I was walking through a care home in my first call, and instead of hearing Lawrence Welk while I was walking through the hall, I was hearing Mick Jagger, right? So because the generations are shifting and changing, right? So in this question, I wonder if you've seen, or there is more blurring of these lines between these stereotypical ways that men and women in particular might respond, because there's a lot now of senior women who have lived very highly productive, energetic lives, right, outside of the home, who have experienced the same type of loss that previously men maybe only experienced. Have you seen or talk about that dynamic a little bit?
Oh yeah, most definitely. But this is where we really have to, as caretakers, pay attention to what makes them happy and not what makes me happy, okay? And in our day and age, especially when it comes to like social media and the news, it is in our face 24/7, and it heightens our losses and our emotions and our anxiety. And so we really have to learn when to turn that off and how to turn that off, so we can still, one, get our emotions back in the normal range, but two, get us back to focusing on other things that make us content and find that peace, for sure. Because you can have a stroke at any age, right? You can have MS at any age. Yeah, man or woman, whatever it may be. And it doesn't matter what, if you were the CEO, or if you were janitor, if you were stay-at-home wife, stay-at-home dad, whatever it may be, this loss of control, purpose, and identity is still the same. I don't know if I got that.
Yeah, no, I just think that there's blurring of lines, right, between the
So if I were coming into your office as a 40-year-old and saying, oh my gosh, my mother's driving me crazy, and you were saying to me to say, well, find ways to interact with your mom, to hear some stories and so forth. Find in the India, I would think that you would have suggestions. But being the older person who would like to connect with the younger generation, what are suggestions you would have for me to be able to share some stories, share some wisdom, give me ideas?
Yes. So, yeah.
Can you repeat the question or summarize that before
Yeah.
you answer, please?
So her question is, okay, we're talking about how a 40-year-old can go in and help her 80-year-old mother, but how can the 80-year-old mother come back and try to connect better with the 40-year-old? So my parents and I are kind of going through that right now. They're newly retired. They want to come hang out with me. They forget I'm not retired, okay? And I love my parents dearly, and I want to do everything I can to hang out with them. But my reality is I own a business. I run a full caseload. I've got 2 very active children. I have a house to take care of, and I still have a husband, right? I don't know if I'm coming or going. If you guys catch me, please do. And so we struggle because my parents, they live out of town, and so they'll come in on the weekdays, and then I'm trying to get my kids ready for school, and they're sitting at the kitchen table looking at me. And it's like, so now we are having this disconnect because our lives are in 2 different places. So we're having to try to figure out how to get our lives back together again. And so them coming to my kids' sporting events has been super helpful. Them integrating into my life, and trying to help catch me where they can, or even just picking up the children every now and then so I can have more opportunities to visit. So I think it's just being very aware of how fast today's society is going and the pressures that people are having to do to keep up, and understanding that we can't necessarily stop and be retired with you, if that makes sense.
And I'm a long distance grandparent, or
Yeah.
grandparent to the dog. So, you know, I can't do those things.
Mhm.
So what would be some
So my
suggestions?
parents can't, like, they live 200 miles away, so at least they're drivable, right? But that's when we FaceTime. That's where we try to, if any of their games are online, where we watch the concerts together online and then talk about them afterwards. But any sort of integrating into their thing, sending my kids this recipe for them to try, to cook on their own, to maybe start getting some of the same hobbies you can do. So then when they talk, although my kids have no idea how to talk on a phone, they can FaceTime, but they're like, I can't hear you, because they have the phone like clear up here, right? They have no idea. Yeah, and so,
Present that.
yeah, right. So this is where it's how can you take interest into theirs and activities and see if we can't find a way to do them long term. Because with technology nowadays, that at least helps a little bit.
It does if they're willing to do it.
And this is where you can only control you.
That's right.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Could you share a little bit about how COVID has affected people?
Sure. She's asking if I can share how COVID has affected people. There's a lot of different ways to look at COVID, but there's been a lot of silver linings in it. So in the mental health world, it has helped tremendously because it has helped got rid of a bunch of the stigmas that went along with depression and anxiety. Insurance companies will pay for us now. We can telehealth anywhere, any place. That's helped with a lot of medical stuff, right? And it's opened up the opportunity to talk. I think somewhere along the lines of empathy and losing that control has helped out. But the biggest thing that people really struggle with is like the Civil War, it divided the North and the South. This has divided family members. This has divided friendships. This is where people don't know what they're allowed to talk about and say or whatnot. And so with COVID, one of the things that I'm trying to do is get us back to the art of conversations, not confrontations. Because how many of you have ever changed your mind because someone yelled at you? Right? And we can still have a difference of opinion and enjoy each other's company, right? Only if we get back to only if we get back to the art of conversations. That I think we lost.
I don't know if it's a question or just so much of a, maybe hear you talk a little more about it. My dad has dementia. It's early yet, and there are times when I'm not sure how aware he is. Sometimes he's very aware of his diagnosis, and sometimes he's not. And then I don't know if he's saving face some of the time, and choosing not to focus on it. But I find myself empathizing or maybe changing the way we interact because I'm anticipating how he feels, So I don't know if you can talk about that, like helping him with things that he used to be able to do easily. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't want him to feel babysat or embarrassed.
Right. Right.
So I find myself catching, and then other times I'm like, well, I shouldn't have done that because he was grateful for the help or whatever. So I don't know if that made sense or if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yes, so we are actually going to talk more about dementia here in November, but briefly for today, here's a preview of what we'll talk about. So dementia is an umbrella statement, okay? You have cancer, and underneath of it you have lung cancer, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, a million different types of cancer. Dementia is the same umbrella statement, and then specifically you have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lewy bodies, frontal temporal lobe, there's over 100 different types of dementia, okay? The best way to describe dementia, so we have depression, we're drowning. Anxiety is the hamster on the wheel, and we got to get it off. Dementia is when you grow up and you make a memory, it gets put on a sticky note, and that sticky note gets put on your brain. Time then puts that sticky note on your brain with some super glue. So this conversation today is getting put on a sticky note, put on your brain, but does not have any super glue. When dementia, a disease hits, it starts getting really windy in your brain. And so what is not stuck down with the super glue is going to get blown away. Okay? So on the outside, they look the same. On the inside is a hurricane. And we don't know how windy it's going to be for that day. And so you just kind of really have to gauge how to interact, because if they're lucid and doing well that day, we give them more control. If they're having a really windy day, that's when we try to give them control in a very small dose. Do you want the blue shirt or the red shirt? Do you want chicken or beef? Something that's still going to give them control without creating the chaos over that windiness, but without us trying to control them. Does that make sense? So they usually say 7 words, 7 seconds, 7 seconds to respond back. So we say 7 words in 7 seconds and give them 7 seconds to respond, because we don't know how windy things are at the moment. But our goal when it comes to aging, but especially dementia, is we want them to die with age and die with dignity and grace. You know your loved one, you know what they like and they prefer. How can you help them maintain some sort of dignity and grace? Now you don't have to show up in November. Any other questions?
It seems like it's important to have some kind of a preventive, type of activity for us. I'll throw myself in the younger category, preparing to care for the elders. And you talked a lot about people, that lose their sense of worth. But societally, we kind of inflate how important career is for people. It's almost like, how can we counter that, because, and I feel fortunate, I'm not, just in my opinion, work, I had to go to my second hand to consider how work defined me. I mean, I considered myself a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a grandfather, before work ever came into the equation for me. So how can we fight this inflation that business puts on us that really makes you feel like you are the most important thing in the world, which then becomes something difficult to deal with when you retire and leave?
Yeah.
And now, well, it really wasn't that important after all.
Yeah. No, you're right, 100%. This is the throw the stone in the pond ripple effect. So the only person you can change is you. The only person you have control over is you. And this is how we start talking to other people. So it's important for me with my children that I am teaching them how to be bored. That there's more important than, like, if you meet my daughter, there's more important than just being a soccer player, right? That our identities can be multiple different things, and how we teach our children and how we handle our family and the priorities we put in our family for other people to watch, that's us throwing a stone and hoping that someone else will pick it up along the way.
You kind of talked about technology and what our lives are like, real busy or whatever. Now we know that there's a whole generations younger than us, well, certainly than me, but I don't know about some of the other ones here, that are so in tune to the smartphones and the video games, and especially these children that are in middle school and high school, and how is that going to affect their mental health status down the road when they don't have that kind of stimulation and such?
I mean, of course, we're not going to know long term until we get there, but we have to remember this is their normal, okay? They don't know anything beyond technology, so for them, that is, like, they're not going to feel that sense of loss, because their normal way of communication with their friends is texting and not calling. So don't forget that that is their sense of normal. Every generation has had to deal with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So remember when Elvis was really bad? Do not look at those hips. This is sinful, right? Okay? Then we had Comstock. Every generation has had to deal with some sort of changes that we felt the world was going to fall apart. But we still continue to have doctors and lawyers and people changing the world right and left. And they will continue to, because this is their sword that they have. Our sword for the world has been different. So, empower what they have. Yeah, I really worried because I went to kindergarten learning to letter people, right? You know? And we had recess all day and nap time. And then my children went to school and I was like, you get 2 recesses, 20 minutes for lunch. I feel so bad for you guys. And then they got to have like surgery to learn how to do contractions. You know, you surgically remove the N and you put a Band-Aid on and you put the T, and they're reading by Christmas, and Q and U get married, and I'm like, they have way more fun than I have. But the biggest thing that I had to put in there was this is their normal. They know no different. And they are learning and growing and will still continue to carry on. Yeah.
Can you put your email address up?
Sorry, you even told me not to do that.
There you go, now you know.
My bad. Yes, my email back. There you go. Yeah.
What is the age, what do we call geriatrics? I mean, when you have someone come in your office and you say, well, you're not in the geriatric group, so I'll think of you. I mean, is there a
Right.
parameter for that? I'm curious.
Not really. Typically, we say geriatrics is 65 plus. Senior living communities are 55 plus. But you can have a stroke at 40 and be in the nursing home. I mean, it's doesn't necessarily mean make you geriatric, but we are as old as we feel, right?
Yeah.
But if you can get the senior citizen discount when you go eat and buy tickets, do it.
But med management changes as we get older,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
the brain does change with age somewhat, or something does, I don't know.
It's more about your metabolism. Your
Oh.
metabolism changes as you ages, so therefore you're going to process medications differently. The half-life of medication in an older person is going to be different than it will be with me. And so this is where they recommend that you would see like a geriatrician. So a pediatrician is for your children. A geriatrician would understand, like if you have this diagnosis of this type of dementia, this med is good, this one's bad, or this could cause dementia, or this, or you don't have dementia, your electrolytes were off, you know, just different sort of things that, you know, us normally would not figure out.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Again, I'm not a doctor, don't quote me on anything.
No.
And throw that disclaimer out there real quick. All right, well, thank you guys for your time today and your energy.
Thank you.
I hope you learned